Hi, welcome to Pamela Price Unfiltered. I'm your host, Pamela Price, and this is the space and the place for real talk. This podcast is all about raw, unfiltered conversations about law, politics, culture, education, systemic racism, and current events shaping our world. We'll go beyond the headlines to dive deep into how some of our most pressing issues impact real people, real families, and our communities. My goal is to help you navigate the complexities of today's world. Each episode will tackle an issue, breaking it down in a way that's honest, informative, and actionable. We'll hear from community leaders, lawyers, activists, educators, healers, and everyday people on the front lines of change. For those tuning in for the first time, I'm Pamela Price, a longtime attorney, political activist, and champion for justice. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel to watch the show and to my Substack to read the weekly word. Your support keeps the conversation raw and unfiltered. And you can listen to Pamela Price Unfiltered wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome to the show. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Pamela Price Unfiltered. My guest today is the awesome, amazing Linton Johnson, a dear friend and a trailblazing journalist. Linton is the founder and chief visionary officer of Ovis News. He's also an award-winning journalist and communications executive, as well as an entrepreneur with a passion for computer technology, people, and planes. In December of 2021, Linton Johnson launched Ovis, the world's first blockchain-powered news network, which allows everyday people to end fake news by incentivizing the truth. Linton Johnson spent more than 30 years as a communications executive and an award-winning primetime anchor, investigative reporter, producer, and writer for NBC and ABC news stations, as well as a radio personality at popular stations in Arizona and France. He earned his BA in journalism from Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University, the nation's top journalism school. Linton has a long tradition of starting up successful media organizations. He created and launched the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit District's television station, BART TV, the transit industry's first ever multimedia online television station, which has won multiple Emmys and other awards. Linton, welcome to Pamela Price Unfiltered.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be on. This is great.
Thank you for joining us. So Ovis News, your tagline says, we're on a mission to end fake news by incentivizing the truth. Ovis, the future of news. Tell us what's the story behind that bold statement?
Well, the story is, I was a journalist, still am a journalist, really, but a practicing journalist. I anchored the news in the Bay Area for many years, the primetime news, and it was at NBC Bay Area. And, really, when you go to journalism school, the Medill School of Journalism, they teach you all the fundamentals about journalism, right? All the ethics, it teaches you to give voice to the voiceless and hold the powerful accountable. But then when you actually enter the workplace, you start to see that that's not what's happening. It's all controlled by ratings and clicks. And I can tell you really what the impetus for Ovis is. I'm writing a book about it, so that's going to be coming out hopefully in the next 6 months or so. But it was kind of like a death by a thousand cuts. That was the reason why I got out of news, like a death by a thousand cuts. I can tell you the first cut. I can't remember all the other ones, but I can tell you the first cut. It was when I was at KTV in Wichita, Kansas. I was a reporter there. And I had to cover a story called Water Joe. Like, what is Water Joe? Water Joe is caffeinated water. And you're asking yourself probably, why is that news? I asked myself the same thing. Why have I covering this story? Why is it, there's real news going on and I have to cover Water Joe? And so it turned out that the sales department had just signed a contract with Water Joe to put commercials on our newscasts, right? Mm-hmm. So they wanted to have a story that kind of gave the Water Joe more credibility. And so I had to cover the science behind Water Joe.
Okay.
And I just thought to myself, wow, Wow, I just got out of journalism school and here I am. That was the first cut. Here I am covering something that was not for news, but it was for sales. And so there were more and more stories like that where I was pressured to do things that were really outside what I would consider news, what most people would consider news. And it was because of ratings and clicks, the pressure of ratings and clicks. So to answer your question about ending fake news by incentivizing the truth, what I decided to do is let's recreate the model. I want to create a new model of journalism, the future of news, that allows everyday people to control the news. And then they can basically crowd fund a story. So that story has all the money ahead of time. If there's a story that you're interested in, it has all the money ahead of time, and then it gets written. And when it gets written, the journalist will share in the pot of money that was created by the crowd. And so will the fact checkers. We have to have at least three fact checkers fact checking this story. And it can't get published until at least two-thirds of the fact checkers agree that the story is trustworthy, verified, and accountable. And then the people who will help create that story, meaning the people who pitch the story and contribute to the story, they're going to get rewarded with some of their money back. So it incentivizes everybody to do the right thing. And the story is pre-funded. So we don't have to worry about ratings and clicks because it's already a story that people already want. And it's been fact checked. And anybody who in that process spreads misinformation or fake news, well, the fact checkers should get them. But we can also hold the fact checkers and the journalists accountable. So in the event that they somehow slip some misinformation or purposely spread fake news, we can hold them accountable, financially accountable. The reputation is held accountable on the platform. The people can challenge them. And that's how you hold the journalists and fact checkers accountable to misinformation and fake news. Whole idea, though, is to stop the fake news and misinformation before it starts, right? We don't even want it to get out because you know how fast the lie can travel.
Right. Exactly.
So let's get it before it happens, and that's how we do that with Ovis.
So, how did you come up with this concept? Tell us that story.
I just kept thinking about what the real purpose of news is. The real purpose is to spread factual information and to get all sides of the story, not just the side that drives ratings and clicks, but all sides. And so the idea behind Ovis is that when you're crowdfunding a story, you get to say, you know what about this angle to the journalist? What about that angle to the journalist? What about that angle? And if you're really serious about that angle, put a little money towards it. And so that crowdfunds the story. Now the journalist is required to cover all the sides. But in a story like for Water Joe, if the people were told, hey, here's a story idea, do you want to hear about Water Joe? I'm guessing they probably wouldn't crowdfund that story because who cares? So we're trying to do stories that are meaningful to you. You control the news on Ovis. So we don't even pick the stories as a journalist. We wait for you to pitch the stories. We might send some suggestions out, but if you don't like the suggestion, then you don't support the story with your money. But if you do have a suggestion, then you can post that suggestion to the platform. And then other people who may feel similarly about that story being a great story can also help crowdfund that story. And it brings more people to the table because stories that would never get covered. And then stories that maybe big stories like stories about Pamela Price and being the district attorney, all angles of that story would get covered. Right now, the media was just focused on tearing you down. But you were, so important to criminal justice reform. There were almost no stories that I can remember that really told about the work that you were really doing and why it was important, all the different angles as to what you were actually doing, what you were trying to do to make the criminal justice system more fair. But they just wanted to focus on tearing you down, not talking about the body of work that you created. And so Ovis would solve a problem like that because those journalists would be forced to tell all sides of the story, not just the ones that get ratings and clicks.
It does sound like from the concept that it would certainly improve and drive more investigative reporting and not just this kind of salacious stories that we see locally a lot.
Yeah. And the other thing is we would be fact checking. One other piece that is really important. Once a story is fact checked, the Ovis seal gets applied to it. So that means that it has a certification that this story has been fact checked. And the fact checkers are transparent. The process by which they fact check a story is transparent. You can see that process. You'll know who they are. Right now, people say there's fact check, but who did it? Who are these folks? The people that work for Ovis, a fact checker, has to be completely transparent about who they are, their background, and that type of thing. And then our fact checking process is run by the Medill School of Journalism, Northwestern, arguably the top journalism school in the country. So the certification will come from that. And what we're trying to do is allow anybody to become a fact checker. So it's not just this elite person that claims to be a fact checker. We're trying to open fact checking up to the masses, train everybody to spot misinformation and fake news and combat it. So we want to see a world where everybody's a fact checker, trained to be able to spot misinformation and fake news.
And then provide that the fact that something is misinformation to the world around that story, correct?
Right, correct. Yes, but our goal though is that the misinformation never gets out, because if we can stop it before it starts, then we're going to have a much more trustworthy democracy, or much more trustworthy news media, which leads to a better democracy.
That's true. Because, yeah, certainly one of the things that we saw in my situation was the use of anonymous sources without any verification whatsoever. So, how would Ovis deal with the anonymous sources aspect of it?
Well, so there are times, very limited times, that you can use anonymous sources if you follow the rules of ethics, the code of ethics, like the Poynter Institution, the Society of Professional Journalists. They define those very narrow circumstances. Some of them is like if by revealing their name it puts their job in danger. Also, if it puts their life in danger. But you are supposed to not just use that anonymous source, but you've got to find three other sources, people who will go on the record to validate that anonymous source. And that is not what I saw, what was happening to you. Oh, an anonymous source says, well, how did you validate that information? I mean, anybody can be anonymous, but you got to be able, if you follow the code of ethics, find at least three other sources that back up that anonymous source, and they have to not be anonymous. So that's where these news media outlets are, flying fast and loose with information. And so and that's how the misinformation spreads and how people get put on the defense, like yourself.
It often tells us a piece of the story, like what you point out, the part that's going to get ratings and clicks, the headlines that the news organizations think people want to, that they know people will pay attention to. But they only tell people a piece of the story, the part that they want people to know, and they seem to leave out the whole rest of the story. So how do we as consumers of news deal with that problem?
Well, there's a joke that some journalists make. They say, never let the facts stand in the way of a good story. And that I mean, it's a joke, but it's not a joke. I mean, sometimes these journalists actually do that. They don't let the facts stand in the way of a good story. And how you have to, as a consumer, you just don't know. You only know what's presented to you, and you don't know what else is out there. What did they leave on the cutting room floor? So I guess right now, until Ovis comes out, you have to just start looking at different sources of news. You can't just rely on one. Because, the coverage on MSNBC is going to be very different than the coverage in the New York Times. It's going to be very different than the coverage in the Washington Post. They have different people deciding different things, believing that they're going to get different ratings and clicks, right? And so you have to kind of look at multiple sources of news to see what information may have been left out. And the headlines will change. The same story, but a completely different headline. I like to do this as an example. A train crashes. There are 100 people on board. One person dies and 99 people survive. What do you think the headline is going to be?
Person dies in train in train crash.
Right. Another legitimately factually accurate story is 99 people survive. Right? Two different headlines, but the same story. And probably the stacking of the facts will be different, right? Miracle, 99 people survive. Tragedy, one person dies. Multiple news outlets may cover it different ways. So being able to look at different news outlets will allow you to get more and more information. But the problem is, who has time for that?
And who has the heart for it? Because you easily get overwhelmed. What I find is it's easy to get overwhelmed with all of the news, and they all cover the same thing over and over and over again, and you're still not getting a complete picture. So it's very difficult. What is your best advice for the person just who doesn't have time to go do the research and listen to the different sources?
Well, I'll have to do a shameless plug, and that's to support Ovis. Listen, we're a nonprofit, the Ovis Foundation.org. We're a nonprofit. And if you do support us with $5 a month or more at ovisfoundation.org, you're funding the future of news. And when we build the platform, we're at the fifth stage. We need to cross the finish line here. But we've accomplished 4 of our 5 stages to launch. And so when we build that platform, you'll now have control of the news. It won't be billionaires controlling the news. It won't be biased media organizations. You'll have full control of the news. And so again, when you want a story covered, then you contribute to the success of that story by crowdfunding it and then offering the angle that you want to hear. And if you have 20 other people giving different angles to that story, the journalist is forced to cover all these different angles because they're getting paid to do that, right? They're not getting paid to chase ratings and clicks. They're getting paid to cover the angles that the people want. And so you're going to get a much more full picture. If the journalist fails to cover certain angles, the people have the power to control the news. So they can tell the journalist, hey, you failed to do that. And the reputation score will go down. So the journalist is incentivized to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Instead of, well, this is about ratings and clicks, and I really don't care. I'm just going on to the next story. So we hold the journalists accountable.
Yeah. Well, that's sorely needed. We see so often journalists, I see where journalists add, some little fact that's not actually a fact. It's just something they thought, oh, let me throw this in here to make my story more cohesive. And it's a problem. So have you looked at, what examples can you give us that you have looked at in preparing and thinking about how to counteract this problem? What are some of the examples that you've seen?
Well, I think here's one example I've seen. There's a journalist that covered your recall. His name is Gary Collins from the National. He's from Sinclair Broadcasting. I don't know if most people know about Sinclair, but they're very biased newscast and very biased company, rather, very right-wing company. But Sinclair wrote a story the day after the vote, before 2/3 of the ballots were still outstanding. And he said Bay Area soft on crime prosecutor recalled after 18 months in office. And at that time, full disclosure, I was working on your press team at that time, right? And he wanted a quote from you. And I said, well, Gary, how do you know that she's been recalled? There's 2/3 of the votes are outstanding. My exact words is, how do you know with more than 2/3 of the ballots outstanding that the margins are unlikely to change? Please tell us the secret to your magic powers of prediction. Explain to the viewers that too. We're all curious how you could able to count the votes before they're counted. The problem is that in journalism, when you're telling the news, you're telling what happened, not what's about to happen. And if you are going to predict something, you better be right. And so there's statistical models where those who predict the outcomes of presidential elections, they run these models to say that, there is no way, based upon the outstanding votes, that anything could change. But at this point, when he wrote this story, there was a lot that could have changed. And, what he said was he wasn't going to change his story. He knew what the outcome was going to be. And so it's journalists like that who are not ethical that concern me. Because if he can get away, and sure, yeah, he ended up being right, but that means that he thinks that he's going to always be able to do this, right? He can start predicting other things because he was right once by chance. These journalists, I don't even want to put them in the same profession. They're just shysters to me. You need to follow the code of ethics and tell the story of what happened. Don't be predicting what you think is going to happen because that's not your job. Your job is to report what happened. And so we need to hold our journalists accountable to those things.
One of the things that I learned in the role of district attorney is that there doesn't appear to be a definition for journalist. It's like anybody, every blogger in the world is considered a journalist. Can you tell us when did that happen? Because I never thought that bloggers who have no editors and it's just I was a blogger. I had a blog. I could write whatever I wanted to, right? I wasn't accountable to anybody. And so I saw where you had people writing things that were not accountable to anybody, had no editorial oversight, accountability, but yet they were deemed to be journalists. Can you tell us when did that happen and how did it happen?
Well, I think it's always been that way. Anybody can consider themselves a journalist. One of the issues is that, like with lawyers, you have to go through school. You've got to get a degree.
You gotta have
You've
a
got to,
license, right?
right. You got to have a license. One of the reasons why journalists don't have a license is because generally licenses are controlled by the government and there's a protection, right? So we don't want the government dictating who gets a license to be a journalist because that leads down all kinds of paths. But certifications, that would, I think certifying journalists through a nonprofit organization and that type of thing is probably one way to get at it. There's still probably some issues with that piece, but I think it's about free speech. At the end of the day, it's about free speech. And so I think that's the reason why anybody can consider themselves a journalist, because if you're exercising your right to free speech through writing, then you have the right to be able to do that. I do think, though, the news consumers need to be aware of how that journalist was. I'm going to use the term loosely now. Journalist was trained. You want to go to reputable sources. Those companies that have code of ethics and follow them, that hold themselves accountable, that have been trained. People like me have gone to Northwestern University, one of the top journalism schools in the country. There are lots of other schools out there that right here in UC Berkeley's journalism school, like they teach the right things. So I think you need to know who the journalist is, how they're trained. I think they should be revealing that, the code of ethics that they follow. And then they need to be holding themselves accountable. There needs to be a lot more transparency, both in the process of how journalism is collected, number one, and number two, in the training. And then people need to understand the training and that process so they can understand whether that journalist is something they want to trust or just some blogger that is out there that's calling themselves a journalist.
Yeah, there are, with the internet now, there's anybody can have a blog, right? And there are bloggers that are I saw things that look very professional and very authentic and official looking with their header and, the way that they design their web page. But when you click down and you look at it, it's like one person who's telling you what his or her opinion is about something. And there are no controls over what this person says, but they manage to become popular amongst a certain group of folks, and people think that that is actually news, and it's not. So,
I mean, listen, if somebody would put up, these are the standards I hold myself accountable to, wouldn't you trust them more than just somebody? I mean, I would hope you would trust them more than somebody who just claims to be a journalist and will say anything. I mean, there are standards that we journalists have put together, codes of ethics that we live by and we try to follow. And then if we don't, for some reason, we need to be held accountable. I think the one thing that really drives me nuts about journalism is journalists like to hold everybody else accountable.
not at all. And you don't know who's paying them to say what, right? There's no transparency, no accountability in the world of news, unfortunately.
Well, I would say that I think that if you want to trust, the places where I would go to trust news are the nonprofit newsrooms, like Oakland Side, any journalism institution that is generally a nonprofit run organization, they generally will list their code of ethics. They're not fueled by ratings and clicks because they're asking for donations, and they're not trying to make a profit. So I think that's where you can go to get better information and more trustworthy information. But I think when you are looking at these mega corporations, there's six major corporations that control nearly everything that we see and hear. Six.
Okay. Mhm,
These are billionaires that are
mhm,
controlling the news.
mhm.
They just want to tell a story that's going to make them the most money. Think about that. What we need to do is return to grassroots, people-powered news. That's Ovis. Those are nonprofit newsrooms. That's where you're going to find probably the best journalism, the highest standards, the most ethical people working for you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for those insights, Linton. Thank you for joining me on Pamela Price Unfiltered.
Pleasure to be here.
Welcome to Legally Speaking. So many times people ask me, why can't you sue these people telling these lies about you? The law says you can't sue people for their opinions or speculation. The Milkovich versus Lorraine Journal Company case clarified that only statements verifiable as true or false qualify for a lawsuit. Proving that a statement is false means you must analyze the statement's context, analyze the language, where is it made, like what medium or platform did they make it on, and the circumstances to assess whether a reasonable person would believe it as factual. There are even more restrictions for a defamation lawsuit on a public figure. In New York Times versus Sullivan, the United States Supreme Court said that public officials were required to show that statements were made with actual malice and clearly about them. So, for example, could I sue Congressman Eric Swalwell? Probably. His statement that I release criminals was clearly something that is not true, hyperbole, a political attack not based in fact. But would a reasonable person perceive it as factual? Maybe or maybe not. It depends on how much they know about the criminal justice system. People on next door may not know about the role of the judge who makes decisions about bail or releasing people on their own recognizance. If they know, or they may not know, that we have a sheriff who is the person that has custody of people who are arrested. And so you have to look at where the statement is made to determine if a reasonable person would believe it or not. In that situation, truth or falsity didn't matter. It was political theater in October. Somebody said, let's have a press conference and have the congressman come and make a bunch of inflammatory statements about the DA and support the recall. Public figures like celebrities or politicians must show actual malice, meaning that the statement was made knowing that it was false or with reckless disregard for the truth. Certainly, the congressman's comments meet that test, but still, there's something called an anti-SLAPP motion that usually stops all defamation lawsuits. What does SLAPP stand for? First, it's short for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. These cases are called SLAPP cases because they're viewed as cases that are designed to intimidate and undermine a person's right to free speech. They are expensive, as is all litigation. Two professors coined the term SLAPP in the 1980s after they noticed that there was a surge in lawsuits filed to silence public criticism by citizens. They were concerned about lawsuits brought by developers, businesses, and politicians. Anti-SLAPP laws were enacted as a means to provide a remedy to stop SLAPP suits. So that's why you have anti-SLAPP laws to prevent people from using the courts and potential threats of an expensive lawsuit to intimidate people who are exercising their First Amendment rights. It was originally intended to protect everyday people from corporations, developers, businesses, and, in some cases, politicians. Under most anti-SLAPP statutes, the person sued can make a motion to dismiss the case right away because it involves speech on a matter of public concern. The person who's bringing the case must then show the court that they have most, if not all, of the evidence that they need to probably win the lawsuit. They have to show that there's a probability that they will win. The anti-SLAPP motion actually stops the whole case, and the plaintiff must show that he has most of the evidence to support the claim. If the plaintiff does not have most of the evidence to support the claim and actually needs to get some more facts, they don't get it, and the case is dismissed. And then the person who sued and lost has to pay the attorney's fees of the person that they sued. And so that's why it's so difficult to sue the media, because they have lawyers and it costs sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to defend the case. And all of that goes to the plaintiffs. So anti-SLAPP motions do protect the First Amendment as they were intended to do. But in the information age, when somebody can make a false statement or accusation and it's instantly broadcasted on the internet and around the world, there's little that you can do to change people's opinions. The old saying is that a lie will go around the world while the truth is pulling its boots on. In 1710, Jonathan Swift wrote, "If a lie be believed for only an hour, it has done its work, and there is no farther occasion for it. Falsehood flies and truth comes limping after it, so that when men come to be undeceived, it's too late. The jest is over and the tale has had its effect." So you see, holding people accountable for spreading false information, and especially the media for fake news, is not that easy for the everyday person.
Let's move on now. Another shakeup of sorts at the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. This involves embattled DA Pamela Price. Prosecutors who were put on leave when Price took over in January are now being told to come back to work, even though they're still under investigation. Let's bring in NBC's Jessica Aguirre. Okay, what's exactly happening here? They were put on leave, but then they were asked to come on back. Were they cleared of any of their wrongdoings?
No, these investigations are still pending. This all dates back, as you mentioned, to when Pamela Price came into office, and then she almost immediately placed 7 career prosecutors on paid administrative leave. So over the months that followed, about three of them resigned, but 4 others remained on paid leave. Then about 10 days ago, those 3 out of the 4 remaining deputy DAs were suddenly called back to work. The prosecutors were originally put on leave for a variety of reasons, some on allegations of campaign violations connected to Price's first unsuccessful run for DA in 2018, others accused of prosecutorial misconduct dating back before Price took office in January, something that the union attorney that represents the 7 says is unusual.
Well, let's see if NBC News is going to investigate the new DA's personnel actions. The new DA, Ursula Jones Dixon, took these actions in her first 100 days in office. DA Jones Dixon has fired at least 10 attorneys and possibly 11. Another 8 left, and at least 1 attorney was placed on paid administrative leave. 6 of the 19 lawyers impacted by her personnel decisions are Black. DA Jones Dixon has fired at least 11 staff members and placed 1 person on paid administrative leave. 11 of the 12 staff members impacted by her personnel decisions are Black or Latino. Her personnel decisions represent a whitening of the office, leaving the distinct impression that she has targeted Black employees in an office with a long history of discrimination and racial bias. DA Jones Dixon reported in her 100-day report that she is onboarding a new forensic auditor. What she left out of the report is the fact that she just fired a newly hired forensic auditor who happens to be a Black woman. District Attorney Jones Dixon in her first 100 days has fired or transferred attorneys with specific expertise that were doing the work we hired them to do. For example, Advanthea Pappas, the head of our domestic violence unit and a foremost expert in domestic violence who was providing desperately needed training to local police agencies on their response to domestic violence calls and to our prosecutors on gun violence restraining orders, as well as the police, has been reassigned to collaborative courts, where her expertise and knowledge really has no use to the public. She fired. District Attorney Jones Dixon fired 2 seasoned prosecutors with decades of experience in the Public Accountability Unit and reassigned the chief of the division. The media has reported that DA Jones Dixon in her first 100 days brags that she's rebuilding the Consumer Justice Unit. What she left out is that she dismantled the Consumer Justice team in the Consumer Justice Bureau, suggesting that they were inexperienced. This is the same team that, 1, shut down the illegal vaping operation in Livermore and set a national precedent and model for criminal prosecution of the sale of online flavored tobacco products. 2, the same team that settled a $49 million case with Kaiser, with the Attorney General, where Alameda County consumers received more than $7 million in restitution and damages. 3, settled an environmental case against Walmart for $7.5 million. And 4, obtained more than $20 million in judgments and settlements in the first year of my administration. DA Jones Dixon says that she's rebuilding the organized retail theft unit. But in the fall of 2023, we won a $2 million grant from the state to prosecute organized retail theft. I matched that grant with $2 million from our Consumer Trust Fund that could be used for that purpose. We formed a prosecution team called ORCA, which trained extensively for the grant for more than 90 days.
The evidence illustrates how retail crime continues to be a big problem in Alameda County. And now, DA Pamela Price may have a new solution.
Essentially, choke off the demand that is driving a lot of what we see happening in our communities.
The Alameda County District Attorney's Office is putting together a first-of-its-kind organized retail theft prosecution team, funded by $2 million from a state grant and a matching $2 million from the DA's office.
Our goal is to dismantle, disrupt, and deter this type of activity, this criminality from occurring, and where appropriate, to divert those that are engaging in this type of criminality.
DA Price says what will be different is an attempt to connect the dots between other facets of organized retail crime.
When it's not on its surface just the theft of a good, but there are intricate networks behind the scenes, people engaging in multiple acts of unlawful conduct, whether it be stealing a car to then engage in the theft activity.
The new team will utilize different investigative tools to make those connections. Those include monitoring suspect patterns and conduct, analyzing data to support investigations, and partnerships between law enforcement agencies.
Advancing prosecution on a specific track where the same district attorney is going to represent that case through every major stage as it advances through the criminal legal system. That's what makes this first of its kind for Alameda County.
DA Price says Alameda County also faces some unique challenges that make it vulnerable to organized retail theft, including its size and geographic location.
Proximity that we are to so many other major cities, we are the thoroughfare and as well as the stopping place.
The DA's office also points out that the project will take months to train on and even longer before real results are achieved. In Alameda County, Ansar Hassan, ABC 7 News.
In 2024, ORCA worked closely with CHP and other local and federal police agencies throughout Alameda County. ORCA trained loss prevention agents, tracked arrests, cases, warrants, and different criminal enterprises. The ORCA team was in direct contact with other DA offices to coordinate the prosecutions. In her first 100 days, DA Jones Dixon disbanded the ORCA team by transferring the attorneys and firing the lead investigator. There are no attorneys or investigators left who have been trained under the grant or have the quality and length of the depth of relationships with law enforcement that our team built over the last year of my administration. Last but not least, let's talk about how her personnel decisions have reinforced corruption in the office. In August of 2023, the Alameda County Grand Jury found that the district attorney's office had violated county policies regarding the use of county computers and county time to participate in the political campaign activities supporting the former DA Nancy O'Malley in the 2018 primary election for district attorney, and that District Attorney O'Malley's office failed to provide adequate training and on county policies and state law related to acceptable behavior during political campaigns. The grand jury found that at least 25 employees of the DA's office violated county policies in supporting the reelection of former District Attorney O'Malley, and that no action was taken to hold anyone accountable. These staff members used county-owned computers and the county-owned and operated email system to solicit funds for Ms. O'Malley's campaign, sometimes in coordination with police officer unions. They also used county resources to request attendance at campaign events and discuss DA O'Malley's campaign strategy. A person whom we believe was a leader in this conduct was Colleen McMahon. Our belief was based upon an email dated June 11, 2018, wherein she clearly celebrated the illegal collusion between employees in the DA's office and police unions supporting DA O'Malley's reelection. We placed Ms. McMahon on paid administrative leave in January of 2023, pending an investigation of her conduct, as reported by NBC News. She resigned her employment before the investigation could be completed, and significantly before she could be interviewed by the outside investigator. District Attorney Jones Dixon has rehired Ms. McMahon in a leadership position in her administration. So stay tuned for the NBC investigation about that. This is Correct the Record. Thanks for tuning in to Pamela Price Unfiltered. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel and to my Substack to get the weekly word from Pamela Price Unfiltered. Your support keeps the conversation raw and unfiltered.